Hey, what's up, y'all? Mack Garrison here with Dash Studio, and so excited to be continuing our speaker series with the talented Hayley Morris from Shape and Shadow. If you don't know Hayley and Shape and Shadow, they're an animation studio of Hayley Morris, an artist and animation director based in Vermont. At Shape and Shadow, they specialize in mixed media and stop motion animation, creating stories that come to life through rich textures, handcrafted details, and thoughtful storytelling. Hayley, thanks so much for hanging out with me today.
Thanks so much for inviting me to do a workshop at the Dash Bash. I'm super excited to do this with all of you and to meet more people in the animation community. So
Oh my gosh, it's
really
going to
fun.
be so fun. And I think on behalf of every creative out there, we're so jealous that you have like maybe the coolest job in animation. Like I feel like stop motion is like what everyone wants to do. And then they realize like how long it takes and they're like, okay, maybe it's not quite for me.
Yeah. It
Maybe you,
definitely is a time-consuming process, but I love every minute of it. It's super fun.
well, maybe that's a good place to start for a workshop in stop motion. What should folks think about as they're considering coming to take your workshop, or what is the stop motion workshop going to be like, you think?
Yeah. So I was brainstorming a bunch of ideas, and I think when coming up with ideas, I was like, okay, this is fairly short, like an hour and a half, I think. And so it made me think about in animation and the pitching process of pitching your ideas, and you don't have that much time to, come up with stuff. So I was
Sure.
like, okay, there's a time limitation. Let's embrace that and just think about like creative problem solving.
I
So
like
I
that.
thought it would be fun to have kind of like an intro to stop motion animation, and that you're working with physical materials and thinking on the spot and like coming up with something really fast. And in my own work, I do a lot of improvisational kind of stuff and thinking about how can I repurpose materials and come up with creative solutions. So in this workshop, students will be animating on their phones, which everybody has.
Cool.
So it'll be very accessible for everybody to learn how to use phones to animate, and learn how to animate frame by frame, which I imagine a lot of people coming to this workshop probably have more computer experience.
Sure, like cell animation or something like that.
Yeah. So I think it'll be really cool to see how they translate those skills that they already have, or maybe they don't have any animation skills. I don't know who's coming, but
It'll be a mix. It'll be a mix.
To make it accessible for people with experience and people without experience. So having materials they can work with and just work hands-on in that hour and learn about the basics of stop motion, frame by frame, using a stop motion app in the phone, and learning about how they can use like limited resources to make something really fun and playful.
That's so rad, because I feel like there's always like kind of a little bit of friction to trying to get into anything new, right? It's like, well, I don't quite know how to do it. So it sounds like with this workshop, it'll be a digestible, elemental take on stop motion to kind of get you started and hopefully inspire you to do more later on, which sounds really good.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I want people to come out of it feeling like excited and that they can do it on their own,
I love
in
that.
their house, or like animate something in the street, like just with their phone, like finding cool patterns and stuff. So
I'm so cool. I'm so cool. It's so cool. I do feel like I am cool sometimes.
yes.
It's so cool with stop motion, even that you alluded to there at the end, like keeping an eye out for patterns. I bet you're always kind of thinking through like, ooh, this would be like fun to play with or put in motion, or this material could be really good. Do you find yourself like every time you're just out in the day-to-day real world that you're always looking at textures or patterns or some of those little pieces?
Oh yeah, like every day I find something where I'm like, oh, that would be a perfect material, or I could turn that into a little film. Like just going on walks. I live in Vermont, in pretty rural area, so just like going on hikes and stuff, I'm like, oh, I could animate like these textures in the forest here. Like I feel like I'm always looking for stuff wherever I go.
I love that. That's great. I'm curious, Hayley, from your perspective, do you have any first initial memories of when you got into stop motion? Like anything come to mind as like, oh, that was the first movie or TV show or first time I saw where I was like, ooh, this is interesting. What is this?
Yeah. I mean, I grew up watching so many movies. Like I would just watch things over and over and over again.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the movies that I grew up with, you know, being born in the 80s, like a lot of special effects were done in stop motion. So like
Oh, yeah.
everything prior to Jurassic Park, well, like all the special effects were
That's right. It was what, Phil Tippett, right? Who did all the
yeah, yeah.
stuff? Yeah. Super
Mhm.
cool.
So I think yeah, I was just mesmerized by these worlds that were created on screen and that they were like real physical sets and whole worlds that were created by artists. So yeah, I'm thinking about the movies I really liked, like all of Jim Henson's films, like Labyrinth and Dark Crystal, and even Neverending Story. Those were all like
Oh, yeah.
real puppets and interacting with live action stuff. And I just loved those very fantastical worlds that were created. That's not necessarily stop motion, but I think that was my first like glimpse of like creating a different world from what we are living in. And like, I just loved that magic of it.
Well, I love
Um,
that they were like kind of like you said, it wasn't exclusively stop motion, but it was kind of cool how they could weave it into like live action or some of these pieces and how fluid that was, especially as another 80s kid, Never Ending Story. I mean, that was like
yeah.
the peak of the 80s. I feel like in movies I was watching, loved it so much.
hmm Yeah. I mean, you watch it today still and you're just like, this is so amazing. Like, it doesn't seem dated. Like, just everything is so beautiful. I love it.
When did you have like someone in your life that kind of helped guide you a little bit on that, or were you just kind of tinkering on your own when you first started and just like, oh, let me just see what this looks like if I try this with my camera?
Well, my mom definitely like encouraged my art making. So as a kid, like I was always drawing with her. She was giving me like Sculpey clay, and I was sculpting little heads out of clay as a kid. But yeah, in high school, I had a really great art teacher that really encouraged me, and I wanted to experiment with stop motion. And he like made this little independent study for me where I made my first stop motion film. Just
Nice.
using like a camcorder and stopping and starting the record button over and over.
Oh,
Um,
how funny.
yeah, and I just loved it, and yeah, it was a great first experience. And then in college, I went to RISD and majored in animation, actually film, animation, video, and you have to do film as well, which is really
Mm.
cool, like learning the whole language of filmmaking. And you get to like have a little taste of like everything. So, you know, 2D
Mhm.
animation, video, filming with like real film on a Bolex, like all that stuff.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it was a great program. But I took a stop motion class, which I knew was like something I really was excited to learn about, and I took that, and I was just like, okay, yeah, this is it. This is what I want.
Totally hooked. I love
Yeah,
it so much. Well, it
yeah,
feels like, there's always this kind of combination of like art and design in the world that we operate in, right? Art is such like a personal preference on things, design, we're trying to create stuff for other folks. And I feel like, especially with stop motion, there's just a lot of like gray area right there where it is art, but you're still trying to solve a problem for the client. And I feel like that's got to be so hard when there's such a lack of do-over opportunity in stop motion, like at a high level, like what's some of the planning that kind of goes into like some of the stop motion stuff to ensure, the clients that you work with aren't going back and having to make tons of revisions later on?
yeah. That's a great question and point. I think there's just a lot of pre-planning that goes into it before, starting. And I think being really clear with the client about the process, because a lot of people don't understand that you can't just like click a button and change it
Right.
magically.
Like, no, that's like locked in.
Yeah. So I think it's, yeah, just being very clear about the process and, having a really, especially for commercial work, like a really tight animatic, having your designs, everything approved, the whole
Sure.
approval process. And then when animation starts, you're like, okay, so everything good.
Yeah,
Once
one last
we
time.
start.
Just want to check in, make sure y'all are good with all this.
Yeah. Because once we start, it's going to be really hard to reshoot. Because it's all, straight ahead. It's not like you're doing keyframes and you can go back. It's like the straight ahead process that you just have to embrace and trust that it's going to all go well. So,
And I guess it goes back to what you mentioned earlier and like improvising, like kind of on the fly. Because like sometimes I bet you're on set, it's not quite going exactly like you want it to. It's like something struggling to land right. And you're probably like, okay, we need to pivot from this and do X, Y, Z instead of A, B, C. Does that happen with regularity?
yeah, I mean, I feel like you can plan as much as you can, but something always comes up where maybe it doesn't go exactly where you're going, and you kind of, have to embrace it and kind of like in the moment, like rethink where it could go. And so I kind of like that challenge of it.
Sure.
I mean, you can, of course, like, reshoot something, but it's
Right.
going to add more time and money to a project. But yeah, I feel like, it's fun, like embracing the spontaneity of it.
Well, and like at the core of what we do, I mean, so much of us are problem solvers, right? We kind of forget that. We're caught up in like design and creative and aesthetic, which is great, but it is problem solving at its core. And so I think designers are always kind of on their toes and having to think through stuff, which is really neat. I'm sure with so much experience in stop motion, there are certain materials and tools that are like your go-to now. I just think about, stuff that you work on, whether it's, clay or fibers, like, do you have like, what are some of the different, I guess, materials you work with on regularity for projects that are kind of like your go-to materials?
Yeah. I mean, in my work, I think with stop motion, it's like such a tactile medium that you're using real physical materials and using real light to accentuate the textures and, bring whatever you're trying to do on screen to life. So, I like working with everything. I
Nice.
think that's what's so fun about stop motion is that, there aren't any rules. You can animate absolutely anything. So that's what I love, just experimenting and seeing what makes the most sense for each project. So lately I've been doing a lot of paper. It's a really versatile material. If one flat sheet of paper, you can fold, you can sculpt, you can crumple it, you can turn it into anything. And working with that like set range of colors and finding, sourcing those materials is really fun. But yeah, for each project, it's always like a big puzzle I'm trying to figure out. And usually for client work, they usually come to me with like, a general idea or style that they're going for.
Sure.
So it's usually like, oh, okay, we see you do paper. Can you do something within this style? And then I adapt it and make it fit whatever, the feeling that they're going for is.
Have you ever had to work with some random material? Like, is there anything that sticks out? You're like, that was the weirdest thing. We did stop motion with like the inside of an orange or something. Yeah, I don't know what it is.
I did get asked to, I did a music video for Explosions in the Sky, like a few years ago. And I, had a bunch of glass blowers, make these glass increments for me. And I animated them. And it was really, really cool. And then I got asked, somebody saw that and they wanted to do a pitch for something where I had to like replicate water. And they were like, can you do something similar, like water in a plastic bottle, but have the water bottle look like it's turning from a bottle into water? And I was like, okay, I don't know if I could do glass again, but what's similar to that? And I was like, oh, they make like fake glass out of sugar.
Huh.
So I like did this whole my kitchen was crazy.
Yeah, you're like, I didn't know I was going to be a chemist as well in this profession,
so
right?
That was a challenging one. So I was like, okay. So yeah, there's always this challenge of figuring out how to do stuff. And the experimentation of that is super fun. So I made a mold of a water bottle in full form, and then the increments of it kind of like breaking apart. So I made like clay sculptures of that, made silicone molds, and then I made a bunch of melted sugar, and poured them into the molds and let them dry,
That's pretty wild.
and then animated them. So I think that was probably the hardest and weirdest material I've worked with, probably.
Well, and I bet like with food, there's like the added dilemma of stuff can spoil or go bad. So like I'm sure that affects like how quickly you need to move. Maybe not so much for sugar, but I'm sure some of the other projects you've worked on when you work with food, I'm sure there's like an expiry date on like having to get stuff done by a certain point, otherwise stuff starts to rot.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
That's
you're
so
working
funny.
against time, so
Time seems to be everything in your line of work, doesn't
yeah,
it?
yeah,
Well, I love that when you were little, you were talking to me earlier about your mom kind of feeling like you were empowered to try creative, to explore all this stuff. Ahead of this interview, I was doing a little research and I found the Nouns Fest on your Instagram, which talked about this, shaping clay and how motherhood is shaping you. Maybe you could tell us a little bit more about that. Your mom had such an impact on you, and now you have this film, Blueberry Girl. How do you balance being an artist and a mom these days?
yeah. So it's definitely a challenge. I'm not gonna lie.
Sure.
Yeah, my daughter's 4 years old, so and she's not in school full time, so it's definitely like, yeah, a balance of like working and watching her, but it's like it's so much fun, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. Like, I think being a freelance artist is great that I have these periods of time where I'm super, super busy, and then I have some downtime where I can spend a lot of time with her. So, I love that like flexibility. But yeah, the film for Nouns Fest was really cool. It's I saw an ad on Instagram where it was like, we fund independent animators. We'll give you, a chunk of money to make whatever you want. We'll be super hands off. And I was like, that sounds amazing.
You're like, that's like a dream job right
yeah.
there.
I was like, I'll try sending an idea in. And at the time I'd been doing these clay loops just for myself to, I always have something going on the side
Sure.
to experiment. So I was making these clay loops of my daughter and I, like me as this large figure and her as this tiny figure, like jumping on me and adding her voice on top. And I was like, oh, this would be a perfect opportunity to expand this idea and turn it into something bigger. So I sent in some of those tests I had done with, kind of a overview of what I wanted to accomplish, and they picked me as one of
Cool.
the filmmakers. So yeah, it was really cool. Yeah, it's such a cool program. Any animator watching this, like, check out Nouns Fest and submit an idea next year. But anyways, yeah, so for that film, the only kind of restrictions are you need to use one or more of the characters, these nouns characters. You can look it up, Nouns Fest.
Sure.
They're these little characters with glasses.
Fun.
And so I had my daughter look at all of the characters that were created, and she picked a bunch of them that she liked.
Nice.
Okay, we can work with that. And then at the time, and even now, she's really into pretending she's different characters. And she was really obsessed with Willy Wonka.
Excellent. Who
at
wasn't
that
at some
time.
point in their life?
Yeah. And she would just go around the house like saying, "I'm Blueberry Girl," and pretending she was what's her name?
Oh yeah, on Willy Wonka, the girl who turned into the blueberry.
Yeah, Violet Beauregard.
Yeah, that's right.
And so yeah, I thought it'd be really fun to like have her interact with me and have her head turn into these different characters and use her voice. So yeah, she in the clay animation, she turns into like a blueberry, a whale, a tuba, and then I recorded her voice saying all this really funny stuff. And yeah, I just really wanted to capture our relationship during this time, and also her voice, which is just so cute right now.
Oh, that's so sweet.
Time capsule. But yeah, I just fell in love animating with clay. I hadn't really done it very much before.
Sure.
I'm obsessed with it. And I think much like motherhood, there's like no manual. And
sure.
with clay, it's very intuitive, and you kind of just have to go with the flow. So, I do the same thing with my daughter, it's just like every day it was just like going with the flow, figuring stuff out. So I really like that like freedom of the material and just having it kind of lead the way for me.
I love it. Well, I love the kind of just the free flowing life perspective. With your daughter, it's figuring it out, right? On a day-to-day basis. We'll get through it. And same with the client work. Something comes up, we'll figure it out. The clay, let's just let the clay move where it needs to. I think sometimes as designers and animators and creatives, there's sort of the sense of perfection that we're always chasing, just because we want to make stuff as good as it can be. But something I've really just learned to grab from our conversation thus far is just how easy it seems to come to you to just keep things moving forward in a certain degree, right? One of my favorite lines is perfection inhibits progress. And I feel like you're kind of that way too. It's like, let's just keep it moving. We can refine it if we can, but let's just go with the flow, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
I love that so much. Well, let's speak to me a little bit about Shape and Shadow. How did that come to be initially, and where does the name come from?
Oh yeah. So yeah, I've been working in animation like since out of college in different venues, but after like working at different production companies and freelancing, I was like, I want to start my own thing. And so I decided in 2015 to start Shape and Shadow. And yeah, I mean, I work primarily by myself, but I bring in freelancers when I need to, and if budget allows. And I just love, being able to collaborate with a bunch of people and artists that I love. And I think one of your questions was like about the logo too.
Yeah, just all of it. Curious how it started, curious about the logo, how it all came to be.
Okay. Yeah, when coming up with the name, I really wanted to incorporate like animation in it, and specifically the kind of animation I do. So like I'm working with physical materials, the shape, and then the shadow, I work with real light. So, and I thought the alliteration of shape and shadow was like very musical.
Fun.
And I work with musicians a lot, and I don't know, I went through a bunch of names, but that one specifically, I was like, oh, this works. I love this.
It's so funny. One of the harder things I feel like with the opening your own shop is just coming up with a name that you like. Yeah. I'm sure you probably went through a million different names and you were like, all right, this one sounds good enough. Yeah, it sounds good.
Yeah. I remember like calling my grandfather, who was like a big influence on me too, and just telling him a bunch of the names I was going for. And I told him Shape and Shadow, and he was like, oh, those are like the two most beautiful words ever put together. And I was like,
oh my gosh. You're like sold, Granddad. Yeah, the nostalgia got you. I love that.
Yeah.
I feel like grandparents have good influence on pushing folks the right direction. I'm curious, who are some other folks that inspire you? It seems like family is really important. I could draw that from your mom, or even just referencing your granddad or your daughter. Yeah. But who are some other maybe creatives in the field that you just really look up to and you're like, oh, they're just doing some amazing work, and I need to give them a shout out on how good their stuff is.
Yeah. Well, going back to my grandfather, I feel like he was a really huge influence. He was a music composer for film. So like as a kid, I'd watch him on his piano with a little TV, like improvising music to the visuals he was seeing. And so I kind of do the opposite in that I like working with like musicians and bands and then visualizing their music. So I think that was like a huge influence, just seeing like the film world through him. But some artists that have inspired me in animation are Lotte Reiniger. Was a woman stop motion paper artist in the early 1900s, and she actually made the first feature animated film like way before Disney.
Whoa, I had no idea.
Yeah. And she worked on a multiplane, which was like what's behind me.
Sure, okay.
Layers of glass, and doing a lot of paper cutout like fairies.
Multiplane, I'm remembering from like Disney, where you can get like depth of field or maybe parallax because it's like different layers. Is that essentially kind of the same thing?
Yeah. I mean, theirs was like super amazing with like
the layers and how it could
Yeah,
extrapolate and kind of pinch
yeah, like
together, of
they could do
course.
all these crazy camera moves, and yeah, like pretty much all of Disney's stuff was done on a multiplane.
Wow. Okay.
Um, but yeah, mine's kind of more basic, more like a lot of drawing in your head. But yeah, it's essentially like like a old school like After Effects or Photoshop. If you think
Nice.
about it, it's like layers that you can put, your foreground, middle ground, background, and I love that I can do, it doesn't just have to be paper; it could be any material.
That's
So
cool. I
it,
love that flexibility, and kind of goes back to like you're always looking to tinker around with different stuff anyway, right? Not beholden to just one material. It's literally whatever you can find. Something you mentioned earlier I thought was really interesting is, you go on a lot of walks. You're up in the Vermont area. It's so beautiful up that way. I'm sure nature has a big influence on you and being outside. Maybe you could talk a little bit on, why Vermont, or like why is it so good to be in a place where you can go on these hikes and step away from work, and how has that kind of helped you as a creative be better, you think?
yeah. I mean, in my whole adult life, I've lived in cities, so I love cities, and like I'm so inspired by cities, and um moving here was definitely an adjustment for me. But I'm like loving it now after being here a few years. But yeah, my husband's family lives here. So when we had a baby and pandemic and everything, we are like, let's give this a try.
Let's get out of the city. Too many
Yeah.
people around us.
Yeah. So we moved to Vermont, and it's really cool. I mean, I love that I'm able to be like live in the middle of the woods and do what I do. Like that everything can be remote now, and sending files, like, if I have to, go to New York or Boston or North Carolina,
Yeah,
like I
right.
can jump on a plane, it's fine, but it's so cool that I'm able to, live in a rural place. And I found it very inspiring to be, in the winter. Now I'm embracing skiing. So it's like I can go out, get some fresh air doing that. And then in the summer, it's just like a magical fairyland with like waterfalls and stuff. So, um,
Beautiful. I've gotten as close. I haven't been to Vermont. It's still on my list. I need to get there. I've gotten to like New Hampshire and the White Mountains, so kind of over
oh
by the
yeah,
border.
it's
So I
so
imagine it's pretty
close.
similar. Yeah. So I got
Yeah,
up close.
very similar.
Very similar.
But yeah, I think it's nice. I mean, especially with stop motion, like you need to be in a dark room, like by yourself. And so it can, feel kind of stuffy, after animating for like 10 hours sometimes straight. So like being able to pop outside and go on a hike, or like go for a swim in the river, is like really nice and like good for mental health.
Oh, I bet. I mean, I'm just imagining you kind of hunched over, making all these little movements for hours on end. You
Yeah.
probably stand up and you're like, "Oh my gosh, my back."
Yeah. Yeah.
I believe
Yeah.
it. That's
Yeah.
really cool. I've always had an affinity for nature myself, and I feel like the juxtaposition of our digital world and what we're doing and being able to get outside is always like that nice reprieve and nice refresh. You mentioned earlier that you started in 2015. Congratulations on 10 years this year. That's
Oh,
amazing.
thanks.
Does it feel like it's been 10 years? Or do you feel like it's gone quicker than that? Or you're like, I can't believe I'm still doing this?
I think it went pretty fast. Yeah. I mean, I started in 2008, like working with, like I said, like different production companies and stuff. But yeah, it's really cool. It's been 10 years, like doing this on my own now. And I don't know,
I
pretty
love
proud
it.
of myself, I guess, for
Yeah.
like sticking with it.
Well, I read this book one time. I think it was Michael Gerber. It was like why most small business, or the E Myth, why most small businesses fail. And it was this whole book basically talking about some missteps you don't want to make when you're starting your company. Someone gave it to me when I first started Dash. And a surprising statistic that I learned is that 85% of small businesses fail within the first year of starting. So the fact that you've been around for 10 years deserves a round of
Oh, thank you.
applause and a testament to the good work you're making.
Thank you.
Here's a good question for you. So you got 10 years now of running Shape and Shadow. Thinking to someone who's maybe interested in stop motion animation, or even just starting their own company, their own creative shop themselves, what's some of the things that stick out to you over these 10 years that would just be important things to keep in mind as you're kind of going off on your own creative adventure? Anything come top of mind that you would give advice on?
Um, I think not be afraid to pick people's brains. Like I'm so grateful to all the mentors that I've had that were older than me and had more experience and like took me under their wing and weren't, trying to keep any secrets. They, were willing to help and offer advice. And I try to do the same thing to younger people now. So I think, yeah, don't be afraid to reach out to artists that you are inspired by. And I feel like the animation community as a whole is like pretty friendly.
Yeah, 100%.
And so yeah, don't be shy with that. And then yeah, I'd say for specifically stop motion, I think it's just requires like patience and time and dedication to experimentation. So like thinking about what you love about stop motion. If you really love like the craft of it and making the physical stuff that goes into it, like puppets and sets and all of that, you could pursue just being a fabricator. And there's a whole field of artists that work on, the tiniest details. And if that's something you want to pursue, there's like schools you can go to learn that. And if you want to, be an animator, I think, just like experimenting. And I think, you can start out animating on your phone, but I would definitely advise getting Dragon Frame software.
Oh, yeah. That's like the go-to for stop motion, right?
Yeah. And it's like it's a very affordable program that I think that they just want, to support the community. And yeah, it's amazing. It's like changed everything, being able to like see what you're doing instantly. So
Not know you're going down a mistake route or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Get it earlier.
Yeah. Because when I was
good.
learning, we animated on Bolexes, like, and developed our film. Like,
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, we didn't know like what.
You're like getting this, you're like, oh shoot.
Yeah.
That's not gonna work.
Yeah. So yeah, I think like when I first started going out on my own, like after I worked at production companies, I was like, okay, I'm gonna rack up a credit card and buy myself
nice
a DSLR camera, a tripod, and some lights, and I'm just gonna set up a studio in my house and like make stuff. And I was like, I really want to do music videos. I'm gonna email some artists I really like and see if they might want to do something. And one that I emailed was like, yeah, sure, that would be awesome. And they gave me like a little bit of money, and I made my first music video. And from there, it kind of just snowballed, where you put your work out and people see it, and then kind of just goes from there. So I think just like if you're into stop motion, like setting up a studio with just the essential things if you can, and just start working.
Go with the flow, kind of the trend of the conversation for today. I love that so much. Well, we've been speaking with Hayley Morris with Shape and Shadow, an animation studio run by Hayley Morris, an artist and animation director based in Vermont. At Shape and Shadow, they specialize in mixed media and stop motion animation, creating stories that come to life through rich textures, handcrafted details, and thoughtful storytelling. And thank you for the thoughtful conversation today, Hayley. And if you want to see Hayley, you want to learn more about stop motion, this is your cue to go out and buy a Dash Bash ticket. We actually are doing workshops this year, which Hayley will be leading, an optional third day of workshops, June 11th through 13th, 2025, here in Raleigh, North Carolina. If you've never been to the Dash Bash, it's an inclusive motion design festival that's built around bringing great people together for some great conversations. And especially as Hayley is in Vermont, we're in Raleigh, and all of you are spread across in the nooks and crannies around the world. It's a great opportunity to come out behind our computers, behind the layout where we're doing some stop motion animation, and come hang out for a few days. So it's going to be a lot of fun. And Hayley, can't wait to hang with you this summer.
Yeah, me too. I'm so excited to hang out with you and meet, aspiring stop motion animators, or just animators that want to like add this to their toolbox. So
I love it. Thanks, everyone. Have a good one.
Thank you.